Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
We have a suite of services that allow employees to access all the different ways that they earn. So, this category now is called earned wage access or on-demand pay. And so, of course, we provide access to hourly and salary wages. We also provide access to tips and incentive payments. We provide access to mileage reimbursement. We provide access to any bonuses and commissions that have been earned, and as well as we let the employer use our program to remit off-cycle payments or emergency payments over the instant system as well.
That was Steve Barha, the founder and COO of Instant Financial, and he is our special guest this week. This is episode 109 of the Leaders in Payments podcast, and I'm your host, Greg Myers. Steve is from British Columbia, Canada, and got a double major in molecular biology and computer science. He's a technology entrepreneur and has founded multiple companies. Instant Financial is a pioneer in the no-fee, no-interest, earned wages access space. Instant allows employees to access their wages on demand. They are headquartered in Atlanta and serve about 350 corporate clients and move about $1 billion in instant pay funds annually. This is a fascinating and growing space, and Instant has a unique value prop where they don't charge the employees for access to their wages and they don't charge the employer. Steve is passionate about financial wellness and literacy, as well as helping fellow entrepreneurs with their journeys. We've got a great episode today, so let's get started. Hi, Steve, and thank you for being here, and welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast.
Thanks, Greg. Delighted to be here, longtime listener, and great to be on the Leaders in Payments podcast.
That's great to hear. So let's dive right in. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up, where you went to school, where you currently live, a few things like that.
Sure. I'm from British Columbia, Canada. I went to University of BC. I have a double major in molecular biology and computer science. Like many children, my parents wanted me to go into medicine, but my whole passion was around engineering and electrical engineering and computer science. So that was our agreed to concession that I'd continue down medicine. But by God's grace, I was permitted to go into computer science, and it's worked out very well. I'm a technology entrepreneur. I was the founder and CEO of Santra Technology, where we invented web services, quality of service to guarantee delivery. And that was important, Greg, at a time where, not to age myself, but at a time where internet technology was being adopted for server-to-server or application-to-application use. And we had to guarantee message arrival and delivery. And Santra built that, essentially invented that, and we exited that business to Mercury Interactive. I led technology, product, and the mobile web business units for TIO Networks, the country's largest bill payment network, and we exited that business to PayPal. And most recently, I was the founder and founding CEO of Instant Financial, and now serve the company as Chief Operations Officer.
Well, we're going to dive into Instant Financial right now. So tell the audience what Instant Financial does.
Instant is the pioneer of no fee, no interest, earned wage access. We provide the service to our clients, which are large and mid-sized employers all around North America, that then roll Instant out as a benefit for their employees. And now with the Instant program, employees have access to some of their earnings within the pay cycle. So no more confines of a biweekly or weekly pay cycle. Instant allows employees to essentially stream their pay or take their pay on demand at their beckoning whenever the employee needs access to some of that liquidity or some of their earnings, instead of being confined to a kind of standard paycheck or pay cycle. The company, Greg, by the way, we're headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. We have offices in Vancouver, British Columbia, and in Montreal. We serve about 350 corporate clients that have rolled Instant out to their employees. And today we move about $1 billion annually of instant pay funds.
How big is the company from an employee perspective?
We are about 50 people right now.
Okay. And you have, I saw on the website, three products, one instant pay, instant tips, and instant mileage. So do you want to speak about the distinction in those?
Really, I'd say we have a suite of services that allow employees to access all the different ways that they earn. So, this category now is called earned wage access or on-demand pay. And so, of course, we provide access to hourly and salary wages. We also provide access to tips and incentive payments. We provide access to mileage reimbursement. We provide access to any bonuses and commissions that have been earned, and as well as we let the employer use our program to remit off-cycle payments or emergency payments over the instant system as well. So we market around a few of the services, but really we've worked very hard to make sure that all the different ways that the employee earns are available to them over the instant program.
Can you talk a little bit about how you work with a company? So your technology gets integrated into their payroll system. Is that correct?
What I tell our team is our place in the world is to move data that was never intended to move in real time, to generate the instant program or that liquidity for employees. So we stand alongside payroll systems. We have integrations with ADP and UKG and Paylocity and Paycor, all the different payroll systems. We have those integrations kind of done and in place. We have about 200 different payroll system integrations and timekeeping systems. And the core data that we use is really payroll related and then also timekeeping or time and attendance data. So all of those different source systems, like I was saying earlier, they never intended to move that data in real time. And that's kind of our place in the world, is to be able to quickly jump into those source data systems, pull the data that we need without this being a large project for the employer, and then make that instant pay available for the employees.
And you don't charge the employer and you don't charge the employee. So how do you make money?
So we essentially earn the right to be the banking partner for the employee. And I'll dissect that a little bit. So we don't charge the employer fees. We don't charge the employee fees, which is something I'm very, very passionate about. And then we also provide the cash flow or the funds for this kind of float function to provide these advances to the employee. And so our program is centered around the instant card. So if an employee opts in for the instant program, they're assigned or issued an instant card. And this is a prepaid Visa debit card. And now the employee has fee-free, interest-free, free access to some of their earnings within the pay cycle. When they take an instant pay advance, those funds are immediately available on their instant card. They can go use that card to buy gas or groceries or go to the pharmacy, whatever they needed that little bit of liquidity for, or they can move money off the card. We let them move money over the Nacha ACH rails to a different bank account, or they can use the OCT network to move money in real time off the card to a different card or a different account.
What do you think the top reasons are that an employee will join the program?
Interestingly, so we had different, as you'd expect, different cohorts of employees. I think it kind of varies the reasons why they're using the program. So we started the company really serving hospitality businesses, quick service and table service restaurants. We've grown into healthcare and staffing and call centers, retail. We have manufacturing employers and transportation companies that have signed up for the program. Essentially, anywhere where there's large populations of hourly workers, the instant program is really resonating with that employer and those employees. So companies like Bloomin' Brands and Randstad and Carnival Cruise Lines, Sprint, Papa John's, Fiserv have all signed up for the program. And we found is different groups of employees are rushing to the instant program for different reasons. We thought this was really, Greg, a program for, we hear these statistics in fintech or financial services all the time that 78% of the US population lives paycheck to paycheck. 50% of the country doesn't have $400 of savings available in case of an emergency. Really, we've engineered or originated, I should say, the program to help solve for this paycheck to paycheck problem. But over the last 6 years, what we really found is interesting. We hear employees that are using the program exclaiming stuff like, I'm smart. That's why I use Instant. And when you dig into that, we hear these conversations around, if I worked today and I finished my day and went home, but you don't pay me for 2 weeks, then we hear employees talking about, I'm essentially lending my money, my earnings to my employer for 2 weeks. I'm smart. I'm not going to lend my money to my employer. I want my earnings as soon as possible, and then I'll decide what to do with it. I'll leave it on the instant account and earn savings, or I might move it over to Robinhood and participate in micro investing or fractional investing. But we hear this conversation now from employees that as earned wage access and Instant as a leading vendor in this space has grown and more people are kind of familiar with these type of services now, it's gone from I use Instant to buy my gas, groceries, or pick up some medicine for the kids when they're ill, to now that this is just the way that I'm in control of my pay. So it's really not just been an evolution of earned wage access as a space or a market, but also the evolution of how people are looking at programs like Instant and that kind of on-demand access to their earnings and the liquidity that comes with that.
One word that hasn't come up that I sort of immediately thought about was this gig economy. So this really isn't necessarily a product built for what we're now calling the gig economy, right?
It's not built specifically for the gig economy, but we do have gig platforms, and the workers of those platforms, is what to call them employees, but I think that's a different conversation. But the workers of gig platforms are using Instant and Instant Pay and services like Instant already. And I think that's really what's driven this. It's gone from kind of this quiet drumbeat around earned wage access to, especially today, where we have so many employees that are not going back to work, that's causing real strife for employers in not having access to the workforce that they need to really run their operations at kind of optimal speed or optimal growth. And part of that is kind of the stimulus payments in the system, the world around COVID and everything that's happened there. But I'd say all that's done is really turn the light more on what's been going on. The gig workers have had access to two things, really, right? The gig platforms introduced two key functions to draw in labor. One was dynamic scheduling, clock in, clock out, or start or stop whenever you want. And then the second was real-time access to earnings. And so depending on whose numbers you believe, there's between 25 and 50 million Americans that are participating in gig work, and all of them have access to Instant Pay via Instant or services like Instant. And what we're doing is really also bringing that on-demand pay or earned wage access benefit to traditional employers so that they can continue to compete for labor. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about the employees. Is there a certain size? I mean, it needs to have X number of employees for it to make sense, or basically anyone with employees, it might make sense?
Yeah, for us, I think this is really proven out at different size employers. Instant specifically really focuses on employers that have 1,000 employees or more, just from a kind of core economics perspective, for instance. That's kind of our sweet spot, that mid and large size employer. But I think if we look forward, anyone that has employees is going to have Instant Pay or a solution like Instant over the next 5 years if they want to hire, attract, engage, and keep their employees. I think the secret's out and the genie's not going back in the bottle. Real-time access to earnings is very quickly becoming the norm now.
Absolutely. So what would you say differentiates Instant from the competitors out there?
Yeah, great question. I touched on it a little bit. Instant being the pioneer of no fee, no interest access to earnings. There's no semantic trickery in the Instant program where we reach into the pockets of workers to drive revenue. We've worked very hard to have what I'd say is the right business model around earned wage access. We talked a little bit about all the different ways employees earn. That's all supported in the Instant program. But I'd say philosophically or fundamentally, Instant's different from everybody else in the space in that we provide liquidity to these workers and we earn the right to be their long-term financial partner. What I mean by that is there's vendors in this space that I'd say are really driving a business model that takes advantage of workers in their most financially vulnerable moments. And if I dive into that a little further, Greg, if you finish your shift at a restaurant and you walk out, you get into your car and the gas empty light is on, that's really the moment in time where most of the vendors in the earned wage access space or on-demand pay space are taking advantage of this financially vulnerable worker to drive transactional revenue. You can have access to an advance and there's a small fee, or this is described as it's like a small ATM fee, or there's an interest charge, or there's a subscription charge. However, these different vendors are monetizing that financially vulnerable moment. And I'd say where Instant is truly differentiated at that moment in time, that employee, that worker has fee-free, interest-free access to some of their earnings over the Instant program. And by being there for this worker in that financially vulnerable moment, Instant's earning the right to be that employee's long-term financial partner. So we can talk about features and functions and kind of, all the different ways that we've engineered the Instant program to be different from everybody else in the space. But I think there's nothing more fundamental in terms of what makes Instant different from everybody else in the space than that kind of example.
One question I didn't ask about the company is sort of the go-to-market strategy. Do you have a direct sales team? Do you work through partners or both?
Really, it's both. So I'd say it kind of also touches on your previous question around what makes Instant different. So really what we've discovered along the way over the last 6 years is that essentially Instant Pay is the new direct deposit. Just like, to use a lazy analogy, just like Netflix was to Blockbuster, mobile and on demand and easy to access, Instant Pay similarly has that sort of relationship with the traditional direct deposit, right? So anybody that's interested in consumer deposit taking can have access now to Instant Pay and the Instant functionality through Instant as a platform. And I'll get into how that relates in our go-to-market. So we go direct to market. We have a direct sales force that's doing a wonderful job out there educating employers on Instant Pay and the Instant Pay functionality and how it's differentiated from everyone else in the space and the kind of core HR benefits around Instant Pay in terms of driving more job applications, increasing employee engagement while reducing employee turnover and reducing absenteeism. That's kind of the direct sales force's job to get in front of these employers. So from a partner perspective, Instant Pay as a platform is being used by companies like Fiserv and Income to bring this Instant Pay functionality to their clients, their customers that they have relationships with. And now we're able to provide the Instant Pay program as an embedded experience inside of their kind of financial portfolio of services.
Where do you think this is all heading, say, in the next 2 to 3 years? I mean, obviously, there's been an evolution or a revolution around this over the last several years, but where do you think it's headed in the next 2 to 3 years?
It's a great question. I won't pontificate too much on it, but I think there's really a few kind of legs to this evolution stool of earned wage access. First being that I think regulators are absolutely starting to look in this space. And I think, like I was saying, there's a lot of semantic trickery and there's a lot of vendors that are reaching into the pockets of financially vulnerable Americans to drive transactional or subscription revenue. And I think over the next 2 to 3 years, that'll become very clear in terms of directionally what is permitted and isn't permitted. I believe the regulators will look at this from a competition lens perspective. I hope they're looking at it from the perspective that these services, a lot of the vendors in the space talk about financial health or financial wellness. And I hope the regulators are truly looking at it the way that Instant looks at it. And, in my 20 years in fintech, the way we've crafted the program is really to talk about financial health as a destination or something you graduate to. That first, we have to really talk about lifting financially vulnerable workers or financially vulnerable Americans or consumers and lifting them to being coping. And then we can talk about graduating them to health. So I think as long as that's the lens that's being used to kind of judge efficacy by the regulators, I think that'll really cement over the next 2 to 3 years. I think also this kind of embedded Instant Pay experience will become the new norm. Like I was talking about, Instant Pay as a platform is really, I'd say today, the only proven and scaled platform that allows this embedded earned wage access experience. And we think we talked about over the last few years that every business is a payments business, just not everyone recognizes it yet. I think similarly for earned wage access, Instant Pay is the new direct deposit, and Instant Pay as a rail or as a platform will definitely become the required experience within anybody that's in a deposit-taking business.
Okay. And I think regulation and compliance and those kinds of things are always good for an industry. And I can certainly see where that makes sense over the next couple of years. But if you were to pull the crystal ball out, is there something that you're thinking is going to happen past that, say 10 years from now? How does it look different, do you think?
I believe and we saw this in lending, consumer lending and payday lending. I think there has to be a normalization or a function of normalization where the regulators aren't going to step in and say X vendor or instant is the right model. I think the regulator's role is really to protect their constituents or protect consumers from services that are misappropriating marketing or kind of had the wrong models. So I think the normalization there would be broadly helpful. And I believe that will evolve over time. I don't think that's a 2 or 3 year conversation, to your point, over the next decade. That normalization that's happened in payday lending, as an example, has resulted in an APR that has to be very specifically calculated and shared before a consumer can take advantage or be taken advantage of by some of these less than ideal or predatory type services. And I believe over the next 10 years that commonality or that normalization will happen with earned wage access as well, where the regulators will step in and say that any fee or interest charge or subscription charge has to be converted to something like an APR so consumers or workers can make educated decisions on the type of service that they're subscribing to or the type of service that they're using.
Makes perfect sense. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about you. You mentioned a little bit about your background, but maybe tell us the founder story. How did the idea come to you? How did Instant start? Maybe a little bit about that.
We founded Instant, my co-founders and I, we founded Instant at the end of 2015. And really to serve, my two co-founders had a background in point of sale for the restaurant industry. So my background was in fintech and card businesses and moving money. So it was kind of the perfect confluence of events where employers were suffering from this massive employee turnover problem, right? In the hospitality industry, it's almost accepted that you're going to have a near 100% employee turnover rate. So it doesn't really matter whether they're slinging mugs of beer or hamburgers or steak. It's really just a huge conveyor belt of employees earn, they work for a little while, and then they turn over and go somewhere else. And so when we got together, it was really, how do we solve for this massive problem within the hospitality industry and real-time access to earnings, real-time access to mileage payments and tips and bonuses and that whole suite of services that we talked about. It didn't take long for us to really understand that we had something very, very special there. So we took the idea to a breakfast place in Vancouver, Canada, called the Dutch Panacook House and talked with the proprietor there. And he said he loved the idea and we were welcome to try it. I don't know how he ended up trusting us to pay his employees without any real program, but he did. And we were just blown away by the response we got. And Greg, I can tell you, the initial reactions were nothing like what we see today, where instance cheered when employers turn on the program. It was very different when we first got started, where I actually remember a moment where literally stood on the soapbox and told the employees, we know you use payday lending. We have a great program that's going to keep you out of the confines of payday lending. And I was expecting, Greg, a round of applause or a cheer. Instead, what we got was a lot of people looking around and telling me I was crazy and to please get out of their restaurant. But I think we know payday lending is nefarious as kind of an industry. And we know that nobody really wants to admit that they have to turn to those types of services. So the employees did not want to admit that they were having challenges making ends meet. They didn't want to admit that they had to participate in services like payday lending. But when we talk to the managers, they tell us the same story over and over again. Oh, I get calls all the time.
Tell me one thing that you're passionate about, maybe on the personal side and one on the professional or business side.
I'm passionate about payments. I'm absolutely passionate about financial wellness and literacy. I think that's another area in fintech. We got to make sure we're servicing need. Absolutely passionate about education and, of course, my family and friends. But I'd say also on top of that, supporting entrepreneurs and the different journey that every entrepreneur has to go through to build something special.
When I started in payments 16 years ago, fintech, the word didn't even exist, I don't think. And people sort of fell into the space, right? And now people are looking at fintech and payments and saying, hey, I want to build a career there. So as someone who has been in the industry a while, what would your advice be to someone maybe just coming out of college, they want to get in payments or fintech. What would your advice be to them to help them be successful?
That's a great question. My first piece of advice would be always make sure you're careful who you're taking advice from. Second, I'd say payments is just such a broad area, right? We've heard that every company is already a payments business, just not everyone recognizes that yet. But I think the future of payments really has kind of three keys to it. One is availability, two is speed, and three is reach. I think we're really challenging borders and kind of the traditional confines of land borders and kind of financial borders. I think that's all being challenged. And I believe the future of payments will take all three of those areas and massively challenge them. But I'd say also, let's not be lazy and just recreate existing models with little nudges and tweaks. I think we need to make sure that folks that are coming into payments are being bold and they're truly rethinking payments, including the business models around payments. And I think that will see us really leapfrog payments and financial services into something very, very special in the future.
When I'm doing my research for these podcasts, anytime I run across something that's kind of unique or different, I like to ask about it and not to put anyone on the spot. I just think that's part of the value of what I bring is bringing unique perspectives. But I did see something about Vancouver Film School. So I'm curious if that's a passion of yours or what's the story behind that?
Oh, yeah. So Vancouver Film School was actually not film. They had a multimedia program. So with a computer science undergrad, I didn't really feel equipped to step in and be a software developer. What I wanted to do was actually get into product management and architect solutions and what have you. So instead of spending 5 years in front of a development environment and hopefully progressing to a product management role, what I was able to do was actually speak to a few folks, and they recommended Vancouver Film School's multimedia program as a great way to get a very specific overview and understanding of how product management worked and how to be a real builder in technology. So it wasn't specifically a passion area other than it let me pivot a little bit in terms of the career focus within technology that I wanted to have.
Okay. Steve, we've covered a lot of ground on you personally, on the company, and sort of where the industry is heading. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, thank you so much for the time, Greg. What a pleasure to actually be able to share my story and kind of tell more about the Instant program and how Instant works. Like I said, I'm a longtime listener to the Leaders in Payments podcast, so delighted to be a guest as well now.
Oh, thank you. And I know your time's very valuable, so I really appreciate you being here today. And to all you listeners out there, I thank you for your time as well. And until the next story.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.